My family didn't invite me to dinner, but they still told me to use the service entrance and bring Grandma's salt cellar. They thought I was just there to carry old things, until Grandpa stood up during my sister's toast, and the papers in my hand changed everything. My name is Ellisyn Harrow, and I was 35 the night my family left me off a dinner invitation, but still asked me to deliver the centerpiece. That is how they always loved me, if you can call it love. They wanted my hands, my records, my memory, my quiet ability to fix what they broke. They just never wanted my chair. At 4:12 on a cold Friday afternoon in Annapolis, my mother texted me like she was asking for a grocery pickup instead of delivering the final insult of my adult life. Please bring your grandmother's glass salt cellar to the mariner's room before 5. Use the service entrance. Tonight is family only, and Blythe wants it for the centerpiece. I read the message twice, standing in the records room of Chesapeake Crown Title with deed books stacked around me and dust on my sleeve. Family only. My sister's engagement dinner. My grandfather at the table. My parents at the table. Darrow Klein, my sister's fiancé, at the table. Darrow's parents, 2 old Marina Board members, and half the people who used to sit on my grandmother's porch at Harrow Salt House. Everyone at the table except me. But they still wanted Viretta Harrow's salt cellar, the little cut glass dish my grandmother placed in the center of every family meal. By dessert that night, my sister's toast would be dead. Her buyer would be exposed, and my grandfather would say one sentence they had spent years trying to avoid. The woman they sent to the service entrance was the only person who could stop the sale. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where quiet people stop begging for a seat and let the truth pull out its own chair. If you have ever been the one everyone calls when something breaks, but nobody remembers when the table is set, stay with me. Because that night did not begin with revenge. It began with a text message, a family heirloom wrapped in tissue, and the slow, sick feeling that my name had been left off more than an invitation. It had been left off on purpose. My sister Blythe had always understood tables better than I did. Not the wood, not the weight, not the scratches where children had dragged forks across the finish. She understood where to sit. She knew which chair faced the room, which seat caught the best light, which place made her look like she belonged at the center of everything. Blythe was 37, bright-haired, bright-voiced, and polished in the way women become when people have applauded them since childhood. She could smile at a room and make people feel chosen. I could read a title chain and tell you which signature would ruin a sale. In my family, you can guess which talent looked better in photographs. I was the other Harrow daughter, the useful one. When my father Corbin lost the property tax bill under a stack of old newspapers, he called me. When my mother Marceline needed the cemetery deed after my grandmother died, she called me. When Grandpa Ansel's insurance company denied a claim for the roof after a nor'easter tore shingles off Harrow Salt House, I spent 2 nights writing the appeal. When Blythe needed old family photos scanned for a memorial slideshow, she sent me 3 boxes and a note that said, "You're good with boring things." I was good with boring things. I was good with things that mattered after the flowers wilted and the speeches ended. But at weddings, dinners, church picnics, holiday photos, and family announcements, I was always near the edge. Sometimes literally. At my grandmother's funeral, I stood by the guest book while Blythe gave the eulogy. At my parents' 40th anniversary, I handled the caterer when the crab cakes arrived late, then appeared in exactly 1 photo, half hidden behind a fern. They trusted me with the keys, the bills, and the bad news. They just never trusted me with a chair. Harrow Salt House was the only place where that had not always been true. It sat on a narrow stretch of waterfront outside Annapolis, white clapboard weathered silver at the edges, with a porch that leaned slightly toward the harbor like it was listening for boats. It had been a boarding house once, then a seafood office, then a family place where my grandmother Viretta kept every window washed and every cupboard labeled. Grandpa Ansel had rebuilt the porch with his own hands in 1978 after a storm pulled half of it loose. There were grooves in the railing from his tools and faint pencil marks on the pantry wall where Viretta measured me and Blythe every summer until Blythe decided she was too elegant for pencil marks. To my family, the house became a burden as the years passed. Old plumbing, old wiring, flood insurance, paint that peeled if you looked at it too hard. To me, it was the only building that had ever seemed to know my name. My grandmother used to let me sit beside her while she paid bills at the kitchen table. She would put that little glass salt cellar between us and say, "Salt keeps what's good from spoiling, Ellie. Remember that. Some things need preserving because people forget how quickly sweetness can rot." After Viretta died, everyone started calling Harrow Salt House the property. Not Grandma's house, not the salt house, the property. I noticed the change because people who work in records notice when language shifts. A house has rooms. A property has value. A home has memory. A parcel has market potential. My sister Blythe started saying things like highest and best use after she began dating Darrow Klein, a real estate developer with ocean blue suits and a voice smooth enough to make greed sound like vision. Darrow did not look at Harrow Salt House and see the pantry door where Viretta kept birthday candles. He saw frontage, zoning, luxury units, and a private marina concept he called tasteful. Blythe called him practical. My mother called him a blessing. My father called him a man who knew how to move things forward. Grandpa Ansel called him that shiny boy with buyer's eyes, but only when nobody except me was close enough to hear. The dinner was supposed to be for Blythe and Darrow's engagement. At least, that was the clean version. I found the dirty version by accident because my mother had never been as careful with email attachments as she was with seating charts. 15 minutes after her text, a forwarded message landed in my inbox from my father. He had meant to send me the restaurant delivery instructions for the salt cellar. Instead, he sent the whole chain. Subject line, Harrow Legacy Dinner. Final guest list. I opened it because I still had that stupid reflex, the one that hopes even after the answer is sitting in front of you wearing shoes. The guest list had 26 names. Mine was not one of them. At the bottom, in Blythe's neat little bullet points, was a note that made the room tilt. Ellisyn can drop off the ledger and salt cellar before 5. No need to seat her. Keep conversation focused on the sale announcement after toast. I stood there in the title office with my hand on the mouse and felt something old in me go quiet. Not break. Breaking is noisy. This was quieter than that. This was the part of me that had been waiting 35 years for them to choose me, finally understanding they never misplaced my invitation. They had removed it. The ledger mentioned in that email was the old harbor repair ledger Grandpa kept at the Salt House. I had seen it 100 times, a heavy brown book with cracked corners, full of notes about dock boards, nails, storm dates, receipts, and repairs. My grandfather was 84 by then, slower than he used to be, with hands that shook in the morning and a mind that sometimes drifted away mid-sentence. But on his clear days, he could still remember the cost of cedar planks from 1982 and the exact year a hurricane blew Mrs. Bellwether's lawn furniture into the inlet. My family had started using his age against him, not cruelly in public, never in public. They were too polished for that. They used soft words, tired, confused, overwhelmed, needs help. And because those words can be true in one moment and weaponized in the next, people believed them. Darrow had convinced my parents that the kindest thing was to simplify Grandpa's life by selling the old house. Blythe had started calling herself the guardian of our family's future. I had started getting fewer calls from Grandpa. That should have warned me sooner. Before I could decide whether to answer my mother's text, my phone rang. Grandpa's landline, not his cell phone, the old Salt House number. I picked up and heard wind first, then his breathing, then his voice low and rough like he had been saving it for the right minute. "Ellie," he said, "did they ask you to bring your grandmother's salt?" I looked down at the glass dish on the shelf beside my desk. I had taken it home after Viretta's funeral because nobody else wanted to wrap it carefully. "Yes," I said. "They also said I should use the service entrance." There was a pause. I heard something in it that was not confusion. It was anger, held very still. "Good," he said. "Then bring it. But before you do, come to the Salt House and look inside the back cover of my harbor ledger. Your grandmother wrote something there before she got sick. I should have shown you years ago." My chest tightened. "Grandpa, what is this dinner really about?" He breathed out through his nose. "They're pouring champagne over a locked door," he said. "And they don't know you have the key." I drove to Harrow Salt House in the kind of late afternoon light that makes old buildings look like they are remembering themselves. The street was damp from earlier rain. The harbor smelled like cold rope and diesel and salt. Grandpa was sitting on the porch in his brown coat, a blanket over his knees, the ledger on his lap. He looked smaller than he used to, but his eyes were clear. That mattered. When I reached him, he didn't hug me. He handed me the ledger like it weighed more than paper. "Your grandmother made me promise not to show this unless they tried to sell it out from under you," he said. "I told myself they wouldn't. That was foolish. Old men can be foolish when the people disappointing them are their children." Inside, on the kitchen table where Viretta used to sort mail, I opened the back cover. There, tucked into a slit in the lining, was a folded index card, a photocopied receipt from the county land records office, and a yellow sticky note in my grandmother's handwriting. The note said, "If they ever call this place a burden, find Ellisyn. She knows the difference between weight and worth." I sat down because my knees had stopped being loyal. The receipt listed a deed book and page number, a trust name, and the recording date. 17 years earlier, when I was 18 and Blythe was already the family star. Viretta Harrow, Preservation Trust. I knew enough from my job to feel the shape of it before I knew the details. Trusts can be simple or they can be traps, depending on who wrote them and why. Deed restrictions can sleep in county records for decades and wake up at exactly the worst moment for someone trying to move fast. Grandpa watched me read, his hands folded on top of the blanket. "She worried about Corbin," he said. "Not because she didn't love him, because she knew he loved peace more than promises. She worried about Blythe because that girl could make applause sound like morality. But you..." His voice caught. "You sat with Viretta when she paid bills. You asked why signatures mattered. You cried once because somebody painted over old initials on the porch rail. Your grandmother said you were the only one in the family who understood that keeping something is work, not sentiment. There was more in the ledger. Viretta had written notes in the margins around repair entries, small enough that you would miss them if you were looking for money instead of meaning. Ellie knows north wall leak. Ellie has copy of 1999 survey. Ask Ellie about tax map line. It was like finding my name hidden in the bones of the house. I had spent years thinking my grandmother loved me in quiet ways because quiet was all she had time for. Now I understood she had trusted me in writing. That is a different kind of love, a love that survives people who talk louder. I took photos of every page, every card, every receipt. Then I drove back to my office and did what I am built to do. I pulled the public records. A title examiner does not need magic. She needs names, dates, legal descriptions, and the patience to follow a property through every hand that ever tried to claim it. By 6:30, the story in the records was clearer than anything my family had ever said out loud. 17 years earlier, Viretta had recorded a preservation restriction and placed Harrow Salt House into a trust with a consent clause. The property could not be sold, demolished, transferred to a commercial developer, or used as collateral for development without the written, notarized consent of a named preservation successor. That successor was me. Not Blythe, not Corbin, not my mother. Me. Viretta had not left me the house outright, and that made me love her more. She had not handed me a prize to make the family hate me. She had handed me a lock. She had given everyone shared benefit, but she gave me the power to say no when money started speaking louder than memory. And now somebody had tried to remove that lock. A release form had been recorded 2 weeks earlier, claiming Grandpa Ansel agreed to release the preservation restriction due to age, maintenance hardship, and family consensus. The phrase family consensus almost made me laugh. I had not even been invited to dinner. The release form was bad. Not obviously fake in the dramatic television way, but wrong in the way documents are wrong when someone thinks no one boring will read them. Grandpa's signature looked shaky, but that alone meant nothing. The notary date was the problem. It said he had signed at 2:15 p.m. on a Tuesday at my parents' house. I had driven Grandpa to physical therapy that day. I still had the appointment reminder, the parking receipt, and a text from him afterward complaining that the therapist made him do circus exercises for old fools. At 2:15, he had been in a clinic with me, trying to lift his left foot onto a rubber step. Then came the buyer. The purchase agreement named Blue Wake Renewal Group, LLC, a clean little company with a clean little website about waterfront renewal and community-sensitive development. But shall companies leave fingerprints? Blue Wake's registered agent shared an address with Darrow Klein's development office. One of its managers had been Darrow's college roommate. The sale price was nearly $800,000 below the appraised value of nearby waterfront parcels, and tucked into a separate memorandum was a resale option that would let Blue Wake flip the land after closing. They were not saving Harrow Salt House. They were feeding it to Darrow at a discount and calling it family progress. I did not call my sister. I did not call my mother. That would have given them time to become victims in advance. People like Blythe rehearse faster than honest people breathe. Instead, I called Malin Rusk, a real estate attorney I knew through work, a woman in her 50s with a voice like dry paper and a reputation for making developers regret optimism. She listened without interrupting while I sent the trust, the release, the appointment proof, the Blue Wake records, and photos from the ledger. Then she said, "Do not confront them first. People who rush signatures are afraid of records. Let the records arrive before you do." By noon the next day, we had filed a notice of disputed title, sent formal notice to the closing company, alerted the buyer's lender, prepared a trust enforcement petition, and requested emergency review of the questionable release. Grandpa signed a clear statement with Malin present and Tamsin Bellwether as witness. Tamsin was 76, lived 2 doors down from the Salt House and had known Viretta since they were girls with sunburned noses and bad ideas. Her affidavit said Viretta told her years ago that Ellisyn was to protect the house if the family ever tried to turn it into quick money. There was no screaming in any of this, no slammed doors, just paper moving into place, quiet as tidewater and twice as patient. That evening, my mother texted again. "Bring the salt cellar by 6:45. Do not stay. Blythe is nervous and we need the evening to be smooth." I looked at the message for a long moment. Smooth. That was my mother's favorite word for anything that required me to disappear. Smooth meant no hard questions. Smooth meant no old promises. Smooth meant no Ellisyn at the table unless there was a bill to explain or a form to sign. I wrapped the glass salt cellar in Viretta's old blue napkin and placed it in a small box. Then I put the harbor ledger, Maylin's folder, the disputed title notice, and a copy of the trust in my bag. I did not dress for war. I wore a navy dress, low heels, and my grandmother's small silver watch. It had stopped years ago, but I wore it anyway because some things do not have to work to tell you the time. The mariner's room sat above an old restaurant near the harbor, all dark wood, brass lamps, white tablecloths, and windows looking out over water that reflected every light like it was keeping secrets. I entered through the service hallway because my mother had asked me to, and because I wanted to remember exactly how low they had placed me before I stood up. A young hostess looked at the box in my hands and smiled with professional confusion. "You're the records person, right?" she asked. "They said you weren't staying." For a second, I almost pitied her. She had no idea she had just summarized my entire family history. "That's what they said," I told her. "Where is the table?" She pointed me toward a narrow door. Through the crack, I saw the room already glowing. Champagne glasses, place cards, flowers, Blythe laughing with Darrow's hand at her waist. My parents greeting guests like they were hosting a wedding rehearsal instead of a quiet theft. Grandpa sat at the far end beside Tamsin, his face tired but watchful. In the center of the long table was an empty space waiting for Viretta's salt cellar. Beside Blythe's plate lay a cream folder tied with gold ribbon. Beside Darrow's plate, a pen. There was no place card for me, not at the table, not at the side, but on a small service stand near the door was a folder labeled Family Records, Ellisyn. I looked at it for a long second. That was when the last small softness I had left for them folded itself away, not because they excluded me, I was used to that, because they had named me as a function. Records, not daughter, not granddaughter, not sister, a drawer with a pulse. My mother saw me first and came quickly, smile fixed, eyes sharp. "Thank you," she whispered, reaching for the box. "You can leave it with the staff." I held the box against my side. "I'll give it to Grandpa." Her smile tightened. "This is not the night." "No," I said. "It's exactly the night." Before she could answer, Blythe lifted a spoon and tapped her glass. The room softened into silence. My mother turned away from me because the performance had begun, and performances were sacred in our family. Blythe stood in candlelight like she had been born there. "Thank you all for coming," she said, one hand on Darrow's shoulder. "Tonight is about love, of course, but it is also about legacy. Harrow Salt House has been part of our family for generations. Some people hold on to old buildings because they have nothing else to hold. But real families know when to stop worshiping dust and start building a future." A small laugh moved through the room, the kind people give when they are not sure if something is cruel, but the speaker is pretty. Blythe smiled wider. "To family who shows up. To Darrow, who helped us save Harrow Salt House from becoming a museum of regret. and to new beginnings. Glasses rose. My mother's eyes flicked toward me as if daring me to ruin it. Darrow looked satisfied. My father looked relieved. Grandpa did not lift his glass. He placed it on the table with a soft click that somehow silenced the room more than a shout would have. "Before you drink to my wife's house," Grandpa said, pushing himself to his feet. "Blythe, say Ellison's name." My sister froze with her glass halfway up. "Grandpa, this is my toast." "I know what it is," he said. "It is the prettiest lie I have heard all week." The room went airless. My father started to rise, but Tamsin put a hand on his sleeve, and for once he sat back down. Grandpa pointed toward the service door without looking away from Blythe. "Say the name of the woman you left off the invitation because her signature was the one you couldn't fake." That was when I stepped fully into the room. Not fast, not dramatic. I walked to the table, set Viretta's salt cellar down in its box, placed the harbor ledger beside it, and laid Maylin's legal folder flat on the white tablecloth. The gold ribbon on Blythe's folder suddenly looked childish. My mother hissed my name under her breath. "Ellisyn, leave!" I looked at her, calm enough to frighten myself. "I was told to use the service entrance," I said. So I did. But records do not stay in the kitchen just because a family is embarrassed by them. Darrow's smile flickered. He knew that sentence was not for my mother. I turned to the room because my family had always been strongest in private and sweetest in public, and I had finally learned that truth needs witnesses. "Most of you were invited here to celebrate an engagement," I said. "Some of you were invited to witness what you were told was a family decision about Harrow Salt House. What you were not told is that the sale being toasted tonight cannot legally close." Blythe laughed once, sharp and false. "This is exactly why you weren't invited. You make everything ugly." Grandpa's voice cut across hers. "No, sweetheart. Ugly is selling your grandmother's house to your fiancé through a company with a clean name and dirty hands." Darrow stood then. "I think we should all take a breath." I opened the folder. That would be wise. My hands were steady. I had checked them in the car because I wanted to know if fear would show. It didn't. 17 years ago, Viretta Harrow recorded a preservation restriction and placed Harrow Salt House into the Viretta Harrow Preservation Trust. The property can be maintained, rented, repaired, and used for family benefit. It cannot be sold to a commercial developer without written consent from the preservation successor named in the trust. I turned the page and laid it on the table. "That successor is me." My father closed his eyes. My mother whispered something that sounded like a prayer, but was probably a curse. Blythe's face flushed red under her perfect makeup. "That is old paperwork," she snapped. "Grandpa agreed to release it." I nodded. "A release was recorded 2 weeks ago. It claims Grandpa signed at 2:15 p.m. on October 14th at your house." I placed another page down. "At 2:15 p.m. on October 14th, Grandpa was at Chesapeake Rehab Clinic with me. Here is the appointment record. Here is the parking receipt. Here is the therapist's note. So either Grandpa learned to be in 2 places at once, or someone in this family got very comfortable with fiction." The room shifted. Not loudly. Older people know the sound of a serious paper landing. It is not a gasp. It is the quiet adjustment of bodies that have suddenly decided to listen. Darrow reached for his water glass and missed it by half an inch. I continued. "The buyer is listed as Blue Wake Renewal Group, LLC. That sounds independent. It is not. Blue Wake's registered agent shares an address with Darrow Klein's development office. Its manager is his former business partner. There is also a resale option prepared for after closing." I placed those documents down too, one by one, because I had learned long ago that if you stack truth carefully, even people committed to lies have to look at the pile. The proposed purchase price is far below comparable waterfront value. That means this was not a rescue. It was a transfer of family property into Darrow's reach at a discount. Blythe finally lost the room. I saw it happen in the eyes of the Marina board member near the window, in Darrow's mother lowering her glass, in Tamsin's mouth pressing into a thin, satisfied line. "You can't just walk into my dinner and stop a family decision," Blythe said. Her voice shook now, and because she hated that, she made it louder. "You were left off because you are bitter. You have always been bitter. You can't stand that I was chosen." I looked at her for a moment, really looked at her, and saw the girl who had been handed the best seat so often she thought the chair had grown from her own goodness. "You were chosen for the toast," I said. "I was chosen for the trust. There's a difference." My mother stood then, because Blythe's tears were near, and my mother could resist many things, but never the chance to defend the daughter she preferred. "After everything this family gave you," Marceline said, voice rising, "this is how you repay us? By humiliating us in public?" The old Ellisyn would have flinched. The old Ellisyn would have explained, softened, apologized for the timing of her own injury. I only opened the next page. "No," I said. "I am returning the humiliation to the table it came from." My father said my name in that tired warning voice men use when they have mistaken peace for goodness. "Ellisyn, don't do this here." Grandpa turned on him so fast the room startled. "Where should she do it, Corbin? In the kitchen where you kept her." My father's face crumpled, and for 1 second I saw the little boy inside him, who had once loved his mother's house and grown into a man too weak to protect it from his own ambition. That was the next document, the one I almost had not planned to use. Maylin had told me it mattered, and Maylin was right, but I still felt the weight of it as I lifted the page. "This is not the first time someone tried to use Harrow Salt House as money for a Blythe problem," I said. Blythe's eyes widened. Corbin went very still. 12 years ago, Dad tried to borrow against the house to cover debt from Blythe's boutique after it failed. Viretta blocked it. 3 months later, she recorded the preservation restriction. She saw this coming before any of us wanted to admit what it was. Tamsin spoke then, her voice trembling but clear. Viretta told me, "Corbin will sign anything to avoid a fight. Blythe will call anything destiny if it flatters her, and Ellisyn will read the page everyone else skips." She was right. My mother sank back into her chair as if the room had finally become too heavy to stand in. Darrow began gathering his papers. That was the thing about men like him. They love family when family is an access point. Once access closes, love becomes risk management. "Blythe," he said under his breath, "we need to talk outside." Blythe stared at him like she had just discovered that a mirror could walk away. "No," Grandpa said. "You can talk right here. You were happy to toast right here." I almost smiled, not because it was funny, because for the first time that night, Grandpa sounded like the man who had built the porch with a hammer in his hand and no patience for rotten wood. The door opened behind me, and Maylin Rusk walked in wearing a gray coat and the expression of a woman who had never once been impressed by a champagne flute. She had not needed to come. The filings were already done. But Grandpa had asked for a witness with a bar license, and Maylin enjoyed precision. "For everyone's clarity," she said, setting her briefcase on a side table. "As of 4:30 this afternoon, a notice of disputed title has been recorded. The closing company has been notified. The buyer's lender has been notified. A trust enforcement petition and emergency review request have been filed. No reputable closing office, lender, or purchaser will touch this sale until a judge reviews the trust language and the attempted release. She looked at Darrow. And if your company proceeds while on notice, the consequences will become expensive in a way even developers tend to understand. Darrow stopped gathering papers. Blythe looked from him to me, and I watched the exact moment she understood the dinner was not merely ruined. It had been irrelevant before the first toast. I had not come to ask them to stop. I had come to tell them they already had been stopped. There are moments when a loud family discovers volume has no legal value. They are beautiful in a very quiet way. My mother tried one last time. "This house belongs to the family," she said. "Not to you." I touched the edge of the harbor ledger. "I know. That is why I'm protecting it from the family." Then I took the glass salt cellar out of its box. The cut glass caught the candlelight and threw small broken stars across the tablecloth. For years, it had sat near Blythe at dinners because beautiful things seemed to drift toward her by family habit. Grandpa reached for it with both hands. His fingers shook, but he held it carefully. Then he moved it across the table and placed it in front of the empty space where my chair should have been. "Your grandmother said salt keeps what's good from spoiling," he said. She was right. Ellisyn kept this from spoiling completely. He turned toward the room, breath uneven, but voice strong enough. "Now, if any of you still want to toast, toast the woman who read the papers." Nobody toasted. That was fine. I had not come for applause. Applause had always belonged to Blythe, and I had seen what it did to a person when they mistook it for character. I looked at my sister, and for the first time, I did not envy her. Not her dress, not her seat, not her practiced tears. She had spent her life being chosen in rooms that did not require proof. I had spent mine being useful in rooms where proof was all that mattered. That night, usefulness became power. "I am not claiming this house to punish you," I said, "because the guests deserve to hear it before my family rewrote me as greedy. I am enforcing the promise Viretta recorded before any of you decided memory had a market price. I will support a neutral property manager. I will support repairs, rentals, and a plan that helps pay for Grandpa's care. I will not support selling Harrow Salt House to Darrow, Blue Wake, or any developer hiding behind pretty words." My father looked up then. "And us?" he asked softly, like a child asking if there was still supper after breaking the dish. "You can read the filings," I said. "That is more invitation than you gave me." The aftermath did not come with sirens. Real consequences rarely arrive with music. The sale collapsed first. Darrow's lender backed away within 48 hours. Blue Wake Renewal Group disappeared from its own website by Monday morning, which told me everything I needed to know about how proud Darrow was of his community-sensitive vision. By the following week, Darrow and Blythe had postponed the engagement, then paused it, then ended it in the language of people who do not want a public record of who betrayed whom first. Blythe blamed me, of course. My mother blamed me with longer sentences. My father sent one email that said, "You have made this very difficult for everyone," and I replied with only, "Good." The court reviewed the trust language, the release, and Grandpa's statement. The attempted release was set aside pending investigation. The notary complaint moved through channels I did not control and did not need to. The preservation restriction held. A neutral property manager was appointed for Harrow Salt House, and Malin helped create a plan that rented the upstairs rooms for small events and used the income for maintenance and Grandpa's care. No one got rich. That was the point. Grandpa moved out of the salt house 6 months later, not because they pushed him, but because he chose a smaller apartment near the harbor where he could see boats without worrying about stairs. On clear mornings, I took him coffee and he told me stories about Viretta that he should have told me years earlier. How she once marched into a city office with a wet roof estimate and made a clerk find the correct permit. How she kept $20 in a flour tin for emergencies and never told anyone except me, though I had been too young to understand. How she watched me line up crayons by shade and said, "That one will keep the world in order if the world lets her." He cried when he told me he was sorry. Not loudly. Grandpa never did much loudly, but he cried the way old men cry when regret has had years to harden and finally meets forgiveness it does not feel it deserves. I did not tell him it was all right. It wasn't. I told him I loved him, and that was truer. 1 year after the dinner, I set a table at Harrow Salt House. Not for my parents, not for Blythe, not for Darrow or anyone who thought an invitation was a weapon. It was a simple supper in the downstairs room after the first round of repairs was finished. The porch rail had been sanded and sealed. The kitchen windows opened without sticking. The old pantry door still had pencil marks, mine and Blythe's both, because preserving a place does not mean editing out every painful thing that happened there. Grandpa came in his good coat. Tamsin brought deviled eggs and gossip from 1968. Malin brought a bottle of wine and corrected the rental agreement between bites because she could not help herself. A retired fisherman who had once rented a room there came with his daughter. A young widow from the neighborhood brought her little boy, who asked why the house smelled like old wood and soup, and I told him that was what a promise smelled like when it survived long enough. The glass salt cellar sat in the center of the table, not in front of Blythe, not hidden in a cabinet, not used as decoration for a lie. Just there, catching light, holding something ordinary that made the food better. I thought about the service entrance at the mariner's room. I thought about the folder labeled Family Records. Ellisyn. I thought about every dinner where I had stood near the kitchen waiting to be useful enough to be seen. Then Grandpa lifted his glass, and this time his hand barely shook. "To Viretta," he said, "and to Ellie, who kept the good from spoiling." Everyone drank. No one laughed in the wrong place. No one asked me to pass a document before I finished eating. No one treated my presence like a complication. It was not the family dinner I spent my childhood wanting. It was better because every person at that table had chosen to sit there without needing me small first. My family left me off the dinner invitation because they thought I was the extra chair. Grandpa ruined their toast because he knew I was the lock on the door they were trying to sell. For years, I believed being useful was the closest I would ever get to being loved. I know better now. Usefulness is what people take from you when they do not want the responsibility of loving you back. Love makes room. Love reads the hard page. Love keeps the promise even when the people smiling across the table call the promise inconvenient. If this story makes you think of an old house, an old parent, an old signature, or a family member being rushed through papers they do not understand, slow the room down. Check the records. Ask who benefits from the hurry. Sometimes love is not a speech. Sometimes love is making sure the right paper is filed before the wrong people raise a glass. Thank you for being here. Drop a comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next story. Commentary, lessons, and explanation. Now let's pull the chair back from that dinner table and really look at what happened here. Because this story was not only about a sister, a dinner invitation, or an old waterfront house. It was about something many families do quietly. They use one person for the hard work, but they don't honor that person when the lights are on. Ellisyn was not treated like a daughter with feelings. She was treated like a filing cabinet that could drive. When there was a tax problem, they called her. When there was a deed problem, they called her. When there was a repair bill, a missing record, an old document, or a family mess nobody wanted to touch, they called her. But when there was a formal dinner, a toast, a celebration, and a beautiful table by the harbor, they told her to use the service entrance. That detail matters. It tells us exactly where the family placed her. They did not think she was worthless. They thought she was useful. And sometimes being treated as useful without being respected is its own kind of cruelty. The strongest insult in the story is not just that Ellisyn was left off the guest list. It is that her family still wanted her to bring the glass salt cellar, the old family symbol, as if she was good enough to carry the memory, but not good enough to sit beside it. Think about that for a moment. They wanted Grandma Viretta's object on the table because it made the dinner look warm, historic, and meaningful. But they did not want the granddaughter who actually understood what Viretta stood for. That is how image-based families work. They love the symbol when it helps them look good. They ignore the responsibility behind it. Blythe wanted the salt cellar as decoration. Ellisyn understood it as a promise. That is the whole difference between the two sisters. Blythe's toast also tells us a lot. She speaks about legacy, progress, new beginnings, and family who shows up. On the surface, those words sound beautiful. But inside the story, those words are weapons. Family who shows up is not a kind sentence when the one person who was not there was never invited. That is not celebration. That is public erasure. Blythe uses nice language to cover an ugly plan. She calls the old house a museum of regret. She calls the sale a future. She calls greed progress. And this is important because in real life, people often do not announce wrongdoing with cruel words. They use clean words. They say, "We are moving forward." They say, "This is for the best." They say, "Don't be difficult." They say, "You are too emotional." But sometimes those smooth words are only there to stop someone from asking the right question. Ellisyn's power is quiet because her whole life trained her to notice what other people skipped. She is a title examiner, so she knows that property has a memory. A dinner table can lie. A toast can lie. A family photo can lie. But a deed, a trust, a recorded notice, a signature date, a notary line, and a chain of title can tell a different story. This is why the family feared her. Not because she was dramatic, not because she was jealous, not because she hated Blythe. They feared her because she knew how to read the page they needed everyone else to ignore. The family did not leave Ellisyn out because she did not matter. They left her out because she mattered too much on paper. That is a powerful reversal. The woman they treated like an extra person was actually the lock on the door. Grandpa Ansel is also a very important character here. He is not perfect. He waited too long. He knew Viretta had protected the house, and he did not bring Ellisyn fully into the truth until the family was already trying to sell it. That delay matters. Older people in family stories are often shown as simple angels or helpless victims, but Ansel is more human than that. He loves Ellisyn, but he also avoided conflict for too long. He hoped his children would do the right thing. He wanted to believe his family would not cross that line. And that is a mistake many good people make. They confuse hope with protection. They think silence will keep peace. But silence does not keep peace when greedy people are moving papers behind closed doors. Silence only gives them more room. Still, Grandpa's moment at the dinner table is powerful because he finally chooses truth in public. He does not whisper it in a hallway. He does not tell Ellisyn to let it go. He stands up when Blythe is about to turn the sale into a family victory. He ruins the toast because the toast itself is a lie. When he says, "Say Ellisyn's name," he is doing more than defending her. He is putting her back into a room that erased her. For years, Ellisyn was present when work needed to be done and absent when honor was given. Grandpa changes that in one sentence. He forces the family to say the name they tried to leave off the invitation. That is why the toast dies. Not because Ellisyn walks in angry, but because Grandpa makes the missing person visible. Now look at Darrow. He is not loud at first. He does not need to be. Darrow is the kind of person who enters a family through charm and then studies the weak spots. He sees Blythe's need for status. He sees Marceline's love of appearances. He sees Corbin's weakness. He sees Grandpa's age. He sees Harrow Salt House as an asset that can be moved if the right people are flattered and the right person is kept away. That kind of villain is dangerous because he does not look like a villain at dinner. He looks polished. He uses business words. He talks about renewal, future, and opportunity. But his shell company shows the truth. He did not come to preserve the house. He came to acquire it quietly and profit loudly later. Ellisyn exposes him not by insulting him, but by showing the structure behind his smile. Marceline and Corbin are also worth discussing. Marceline is obsessed with a smooth evening. That word smooth is important. In many families, smooth means nobody challenges the person doing wrong. It means the wounded person must stay quiet so the comfortable people can stay comfortable. Marceline does not ask whether the sale is honest. She asks Ellisyn not to make the night difficult. Corbin is different, but not innocent. He is weak in a way that causes damage. He wants peace, but he does not want truth. He wants his daughters to stop fighting, but he does not want to ask why one daughter is always standing near the kitchen. His failure is not loud cruelty. His failure is cowardice, and cowardice can protect a lie just as strongly as cruelty can. One of the best parts of this story is that Ellisyn does not turn into a greedy person once she has power. That matters. If she had walked in and said, "The house is mine now," the story would become smaller. It would become a fight over property. But she does not do that. She says she is not claiming the house to punish them. She is enforcing Viretta's promise. That gives her moral strength. She is not using the trust to become the new tyrant of the family. She is using it to stop a dishonest sale, protect Grandpa's care, and preserve the house in a responsible way. That is a mature kind of power. It does not need revenge to become ugly. It uses boundaries, law, and purpose. The glass salt cellar is the heart of the story. At first, it is used as a decoration by the wrong people. Blythe wants it because it looks pretty on the table. Marceline wants it because it helps the dinner feel like family tradition. But Grandpa moves it in front of Ellisyn, and suddenly the meaning changes. It becomes recognition. It becomes a symbol of trust. Viretta used to say salt keeps what is good from spoiling. In the story, Ellisyn becomes the salt. Not because she is sweet, not because she makes everyone happy, because she preserves what matters. She stops the family from spoiling the house, the promise, and Grandpa's dignity completely. That is a beautiful idea. Sometimes the person who seems strict, careful, or difficult is the one preserving the only honest thing left. There is also a deeper lesson about invitations. Many people spend years waiting to be invited by families, friends, or communities that only remember them when they need something. They keep hoping that if they work harder, stay calmer, give more, fix more, forgive more, and complain less, someone will finally pull out a chair. Ellisyn's journey shows the danger of that hope. Not all tables are worth begging for. Some tables are built to remind you that you are less important. Some invitations are withheld because your absence helps someone else control the story. Ellisyn does not win because she finally gets Blythe's approval. She wins because she stops needing it. By the end, she builds a table where people come without making her small first. This story also shows why paperwork matters, especially for older adults and family property. Many people think legal papers are cold. They think love should be enough. But the truth is, love without clear records can be stolen by the first person willing to lie. Viretta understood that. She loved her family, but she also knew them. She knew Corban could be weak. She knew Blythe loved applause. She knew money could turn memory into a sales pitch. So she recorded a protection. She put the promise where emotions could not erase it. That is not cold. That is wise. If there is an old house, a trust, a will, a deed, a power document, or a family business, the time to read it is before people are raising glasses, not after the closing papers are signed. Another important point is timing. Ellisyn does not walk into the dinner with only anger. She walks in after taking action. That is why her confrontation works. She already checked the records. She already called the attorney. She already filed the notice of disputed title. She already contacted the closing company and the lender. So when Blythe says, "You can't stop this," Ellisyn can calmly say with her actions, "I already did." That is a lesson for anyone facing a manipulative situation. Do not rush into a fight only because your pain is real. Pain is real, but proof is stronger. Get the records. Save the messages. Check the dates. Talk to the right professional. Make sure your truth has legs before you bring it into a room full of people trained to deny it. Let's also talk about why the ending feels peaceful instead of empty. The story does not end with everyone apologizing. That would not be honest. Some families do not become better just because they are exposed. Blythe does not suddenly understand Ellisyn's pain. Marceline does not become warm. Corban does not become brave overnight. Darrow does not turn into a good man. The sale collapses, the legal process moves forward, and the family loses control of the story. That is realistic. Closure does not always mean people say sorry. Sometimes closure means the damage stops. Sometimes it means the wrong people no longer have access. Sometimes it means the house stays standing and the person who protected it can finally breathe. The final supper at Harrow Salt House is not just a happy ending, it is a correction. The first dinner was polished, formal, and dishonest. The final dinner is simple, warm, and chosen. The first table used the salt cellar as decoration. The final table uses it as memory. The first dinner had a guest list designed to erase Ellisyn. The final dinner has people who see her without needing her to prove her worth. That is the emotional movement of the whole story. She goes from service entrance to center table, from records person to trusted protector, from excluded daughter to the one who keeps Viretta's promise alive. So what do we learn from Ellisyn? First, never confuse being needed with being valued. If people only call when something is broken, but disappear when it is time to honor you, pay attention. Second, old promises need protection. A good heart is not always enough when money enters the room. Third, calm is not weakness. Sometimes calm is what power looks like when it has documents. Fourth, when a family calls you difficult for asking fair questions, ask yourself what they gain from your silence. And fifth, you do not have to keep waiting outside a door that only opens when someone needs your labor. And here is the lesson for families. especially families with aging parents, old property, and complicated history. Do not rush older people into signing documents they do not fully understand. Do not treat family property like quick cash if someone else spent a lifetime preserving it. Do not leave the careful person out of the room just because you are afraid they will read the paper. And do not mistake the quiet one for the powerless one. In many families, the quiet one knows where everything is buried because they were the only one paying attention while everyone else was making speeches.
Ellison's revenge was not loud, but it was complete. She did not destroy the family for pleasure. She stopped a dishonest sale. She exposed a hidden buyer. She protected her grandfather. She honored her grandmother. She forced the room to hear the truth. And then she moved on without begging for the chair they should have offered years ago. That is what makes this story powerful. The final victory is not that Blythe's toast was ruined. The real victory is that Ellisyn no longer needed Blythe's table. She had the promise, the proof, the salt, the house, and finally, a room where she belonged without being used first. So if this story stays with you, maybe it is because you know someone like Ellisyn. Maybe you are Ellisyn in your own family. Maybe you are the one who handles paperwork, checks on the older parent, remembers the insurance, saves the receipts, and still gets treated like an afterthought. If that is you, hear this clearly. Your care has value. Your attention has value. Your memory has value. And you are allowed to stop serving tables where nobody will set a place for you. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is not shout. Sometimes it is to read the record, protect the promise, and walk through the front door with the truth in your hands.